Today's topic is Kashmir, from post-colonial to settler-colonial issues. The presenter will analyze Kashmir through the lens of Indian settler colonialism, which is fast dispossessing indigenous people and exploiting resources, resulting in neo-colonial maldevelopment. Our presenter, Dr. Ather Zia, is a political anthropologist, poet, short fiction writer, and columnist. She's an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology and Gender Studies program at the University of Northern Colorado, Greeley. Dr. Zia is the author of Resisting Disappearances, Military Occupation and Women's Activism in Kashmir, published in 2019, which won the 2020 Gloria Anzaldúa Honorable Mention Award, the 2021 Public Anthropologist Award, Kashmir Advocate of the Year Award 2021, and 2021 Rosaldo Book Prize Honorable Mention. She's been featured in the Family List 2021, which is a list of 100 women from the Global South working in the fields of foreign policy, peace building, law, activism, and development. She's the co-editor of 3 books. Can You Hear Kashmiri Women Speak, published in 2020, Resisting Occupation in Kashmir, published in 2018, and A Desolation Called Peace, published in 2019. She has published a poetry called The Frame, and another collection is on the way. In 2013, Dr. Zia's ethnographic poem on Kashmir won an award from the Society for Humanistic Anthropology. She's the founder editor of Kashmir Lit, an online journal of Kashmiri and diasporic writing, and the co-founder of Critical Kashmir Studies Collective, an interdisciplinary network of scholars working on the Kashmir region. What an impressive bio. It gives me great pleasure to call upon Dr. Zia to begin her presentation. Dr. Zia.
Thank you so much to the organizers, those who are present and those who are also traveling, for inviting me and paying attention to Kashmir. I think when you talked about burning issues, Kashmir is a burning issue, but no one really sees the burning the way it's happening. So what I have done is that today, this talk I'm treating as a teach-in because I don't know how many people in the audience know about Kashmir and how many are already well-versed with what's happening in Kashmir. So I kind of designed and devised this as a teach-in so that we kind of know a little bit of history and what's happening currently and how the invisibilization of Kashmir has happened. So I'll be sharing my screen and hopefully this presentation is going to last 40 minutes or less, and then we can have question and answers. And I've also changed the title of the talk a little bit, not a lot, just to make it more explicit. Since you have also made me a co-host, I can see people being, coming into the room. So hopefully that will be taken care of.
Yes, I'm taking care. They are all in the room right now as we speak.
Okay. So the title of this talk is A Neo-Colonial Wound, Existing Impediments and Envisioning Solidarity for Indian Occupied Kashmir. I think for a lot of people, when we even use the word Indian Occupied Kashmir, it sounds like, where is the occupation? India is the largest democracy in Asia, and how is Kashmir occupied? I think that's one of the major impediments to Kashmir's history and the kind of neo-colonialism that is prevalent in Kashmir. So if you don't agree with that vantage, I would say be patient with the kind of vantage that I'm presenting, because this is what Kashmiri vantage is and what has been in the last 72 years. But it's just the invisibilization of Kashmir that has happened, and I'll define why that has happened. So moving forward. So there are some of the things like Kashmir has been in this colonial imagination, especially the classical colonialism imagination before 1947. It's been described in so many different ways. So these are different ways of describing Kashmir and naming Kashmir, 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 Kashmir. And usually when we ask people, do you know Kashmir? They know it as a sweater. They know it as a wool, but most likely they don't know it as the place. And I think that's also like there's layers of invisibilization that have happened in this region. So some of the all these salient points that I've noted, and I've crossed them out because this is probably what we have heard most likely connected to what Kashmir is. Many times when on the global stage we hear what Kashmir is, it's referred to as a bilateral dispute between India and Pakistan, and that clearly invisibilizes 8 million people across the line of control. So if you take a look at the map on your right-hand side, you'll see the orange part, and then you'll see the green part. And in between, you will see this dotted line, and that's the line of control that divides two Kashmirs. One Kashmir is under the occupation of India, and the other is under the administration of Pakistan. And I'm using these words very carefully, administration and occupation. This is also known as Azad Kashmir, and this is the Jammu and Kashmir. That's the official designation for Kashmir through India. And there's n number of ways that United Nations also describes this region. I think administered might be the most historically correct because these are technically just administered regions. They don't belong to any of the two countries. So bilateral dispute is, it majorly provides the invisibilization factor, because then you kind of think that it belongs to, the problem is between the two countries and there is no issue with the people. But the Kashmiri people, they have been for the last 72 years since 1947, and even before clamoring to have some sort of a prototype of a democratic system. So then we also hear a lot about territorial dispute. Again, it kind of like boils down to that there is some kind of land border dispute between India and Pakistan, again, invisibilizing Kashmiris, as if there was no voice, there's no clamor, there is no movement inside Kashmir, within the Kashmiris, as people thinking about this region and the political destiny of this region. Then the other thing you must have heard from the Indian narrative especially is the trope of domestic issue. So for the last 72 years, India really has been very successful, and I will focus on the Indian narrative more on than the Pakistani narrative, because I belong to the Jammu and Kashmir, and I also have my work majorly connects to what is happening inside Jammu and Kashmir. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about the entire region. But India has been really successfully able to downgrade this as a domestic issue, as if it's an internal issue. It's not an international issue. But we have to come to terms with the fact that Kashmir is an international issue, and not just through the two countries being involved, but also because United Nations did take over and did want to help in deciding the political destiny of this region. What that destiny is and how people factor into that, we'll talk about that in a little while. Then you also hear about Kashmir as proxy war. Pakistan's proxy war against India. And that also invisibilizes the region's history with Pakistan, the contiguity with Pakistan, the affective relation with Pakistan. It kind of completely criminalizes Kashmiri links with what is now Pakistan, because we also have to realize that in 1947, the two countries are forming. And I also don't want to use the word partition, because that gives an idea that India was this one big country that was torn asunder. Of course, there was a lot of displacement. There was a lot of, massacres, and it was one of the worst catastrophes of the, early 20th century. And barring that, when you look at that time, these are formation of two countries for whatever reasons. But at the same time, what you also see inside Kashmir during that time, and the kind of clamor you see in Kashmiris to join Pakistan, which was completely disregarded at that time. And then the movement for independence as well, so that this region could become an independent sovereign democracy, basically. So now all of that history is almost completely not told to the rest of the world. It's almost as if like India is this monolithic country that has existed for millennia. And then the partition happened where the Muslims took one side, and we see how it's unfolding through the RSS narrative as well. But that's not just the RSS narrative, that's also what, quote unquote, the secular party narrative. So now it's kind of like packaged as a proxy war, and in a very Islamophobic world, it's very easy to buy that. And then that kind of falls into terrorism as well. Many times you see the, in the international arena, Kashmiri movement is still kind of not seen as the terrorism that India wants to push on people all across the globe, that it's not a resistance, but it's terrorism. And that's how they, early on, the Kashmiri militants or combatants, they were called, they were not called the terrorists they're called today. But after 2001 and after RSS has completely taken over India, so that has become a trope, that Kashmiris equals to criminalization equals to terrorism. So anything you speak for Kashmiri, even this presentation right now, is intellectual terrorism. That's what it was named some years back. And the work of this work, these teachings, everything is technically criminalized by India. So we do want to kind of look at these and also try to remember that what is prevalent in Kashmir as of now is a military and legal annexation. And when I say legal, that means that they're using their own laws to annex this place. So that kind of puts a lot of things in perspective that have happened in the past 2 years as well. And we'll talk about them, hopefully, if we have enough time. So what are we doing here today? Why am I speaking? Why, why is the world ready? And that I feel it's very heartening for us Kashmiris, even though the repression is at the all-time high right now. And people are terribly repressed and silenced through various laws that have been imposed on them. Journalists, I talk about that later on. But what we are doing in this moment, we're really decolonizing knowledges around this place. The knowledge has been around Kashmir, the history around Kashmir has been colonized to an extent. There is so much violence in the vocabularies itself that are deployed around Kashmir. So what we have been trying to do in the past 15 years plus is to kind of devise a decolonial praxis around Kashmir and start thinking about Kashmir through a feminist praxis. And feminism isn't only linked to just women or genders, but it's a feminism is a political stance where you kind of look for social justice and political justice of all peoples. So that's the stance that critical Kashmir studies, which is a sub-discipline that emerged in the last 15 years. What has happened is that it's early on, the dominance was Indian narrative as well as Pakistani narrative, even though that is in some ways, many ways, sympathetic to Kashmir and Kashmiri vantage. But the critical Kashmir studies, like from Kashmiri scholars, from Kashmiri people themselves, that was completely unheard. And even if they were voicing their demands, or they were voicing their views, they were being repressed. And I think in early 1984, just 3 days back, we observed the hanging of who is known as the father of independent Kashmiri movement, Maqbul Bhatt. So that was 1984 when he was hung for a case that he was implicated in. And again, he didn't receive a fair trial. And that was repeated in 2013 when another Kashmiri was hanged for satisfying India's collective conscience. So anytime Kashmiris have spoken for themselves, and I'm not saying that Kashmiris have been speaking only for the last 15 years, or this critical Kashmiri studies is something new. Kashmiris have been speaking in this particular idiom for the last 72 years. The only thing is that India was vastly, and I speak for the Indian narrative because that's how I see my work, that's where it relates. India was very successful in completely undermining Kashmiri movement and undermining Kashmiri narratives and making sure that the global stage was not available to Kashmiris, and they were kept under various iterations of different forms of neo-colonialism, and we'll talk about that, which is why no one has really I mean, I'm not saying people in this audience, but mostly when you talk about Kashmir and then you talk about India, it's very hard to think about India with its yoga and ahimsa and whatever. And of course, the figure of Gandhi that was not seen critically, but was accepted unquestioningly. It doesn't seem like an occupation. So there is double labor involved in the kind of decolonizing Kashmir. One is extracting Kashmir from the Western colonial imperial narrative, because, overarchingly, every post-colonial country is also facing neo-colonialism of a different kind. In that, India is also implicated. India also comes in that rubric. So one, we have to do that, and also from before 1947. And then we have to extract Kashmir from brown imperial neo-colonial narrative that India imposes on it. So there's like double labor to be done. And I think that's something we have to understand in this particular moment. And then the other thing that I also want to say is that many times when people think about Kashmir, they think about 1947, because that's when the two countries were formed. But I think it will really help us if we don't think about Kashmir from 1947 onwards. We kind of change our calendar and we kind of move the date. And for lack of a better date, we could move to 1931 when there was a massacre that took place because there was a protest. And you see this picture from 1931. It takes place in Kashmir, in the capital, when the ruler at that time, who was kind of a vassal of the paramountcy of British Crown, he was ruling. He was a Hindu monarch ruling a dominantly Muslim people who were also marginalized and repressed. That's a separate history altogether. And they were also demanding some sort of a constitutional monarchy, some sort of a prototype of a democracy. And they didn't see themselves as without the king, sort of, but they saw him as some sort of a constitutional head. But he wanted to completely be what he was, and there were other movements happening inside Kashmir at that time. So in 13th July 1931 is what Kashmiris celebrate as Martyrs Day. There were 22 people who were massacred that day. They were executed. And then this is the picture from now. Many times when we kind of, it's 2016, a boy was killed. This is a normal happening inside Kashmir. The only thing that is happening since the last 3 years is that even mourning is not allowed. So, so we kind of like shift the dates. It also shifts our vantage. Because when we think about 1947, then it becomes the India-Pakistan issue, and it's very easy to invisibilize where Kashmiris are in that amalgam. So we have to kind of think about what were Kashmiris, who were Kashmiris before that, and what were they asking, and what have they been asking after the creation of these two countries, and what have they been saying in each decade. So that's an important question for all of us and those who want to understand Kashmir. So just to kind of like take you a little back, Kashmiris in 1865, there was the first workers' movement in South Asia. So Kashmiri scholars have written about this, but they've usually written about this in Urdu and Kashmiri and even English. But they didn't have global platforms to take this story because, you didn't have this kind of a technological savvy world. You didn't have people traveling as much. And of course, Kashmiris also were, in these days, they were in indentured slavery. More than 75% of people lived in indentured slavery under that monarch that I just talked about. So in 1865, there was this Pashmina shawl weavers massacre. Again, I think 22 people on a bridge were killed. And these were the shawls that they were making. They were actually protesting against taxation, and they were going to Europe. And I think Princess Josephine and all of those people, and even in the Victorian society, they were wearing these pashmina shawls, and they're also very famous right now, even though people are not wearing real pashmina. That's a separate story. So Kashmiris, in the equation of, like, when we think about the trope of partition, which I don't use as a partition, but creation of two countries, in that trope, Kashmiris get invisibilized and what they were asking. And it's also very arrogant of these colonial states to think that they're going to give people options and the people are going to comply. And that's something that we must remember when we think about the Kashmiri movement as of now. I think I'm missing something. Looks like there is a slide that might be slightly off. In the colonial imagination, Kashmir was also known as the Switzerland of East. So if you go back to thinking about, old classical, this British colonial texts or poetry that they wrote, or they wrote fiction they wrote, or memoirs that they were writing, they were mentioning Kashmir, and this colonial imagination was really looking at Kashmir as if this was a beautiful place. But the natives were always, even in those classic texts, they were completely forgotten. They were seen as these, there's this famous British missionary who works in Kashmir in the early 18th century, starts this Christian missionary school as well. And he very liberally in those texts talks about Kashmiris who are full of cowardice, that's the colonial gaze that has been imposed on most of South Asia and also Southeast Asia and Africa. But that also permeates Kashmir, and now it's kind of taken a different spin within the Indian imagination. So you also have that view under the new colonialism that India imposed. So the end of British rule, when that happens, there is creation of India and Pakistan. Then the first war over Kashmir takes place between the two countries. And what that does is, the first war is basically, the British are leaving and they give you this option that you either have to be with India or have to be with Pakistan now. Where do Kashmiris want to go? So they already had an independence movement going on, and there are written records and researches that kind of talk about how majority of Kashmiris at that time, they thought of independence. And it's also kind of going towards, it's not just the region that you see today, but it's also the Northwestern Frontier Province. It's also Gilgit-Baltistan. These are all parts of the princely state at that time. So United Nations intervened between the two, and by the logic of quote unquote partition, Kashmir should have gone to Pakistan. And many Kashmiris dominantly, they were for Pakistan. And what you see Azad Kashmir today is basically people who actually liberated themselves from the impending Indian occupation. And India doesn't see it like that. It presents that to the world as if Pakistan annexed Kashmir. But it's a more complicated, more nuanced story that has been told by Kashmiris, but has been heard by no one. So then you have the UN mandated plebiscite that should have happened, did not happen. Then you have the ceasefire line drawn in 1949. And then also bifurcation of Kashmir takes place, and you have the two parts, Azad Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir, which you have now. So one of the little things that we might want to kind of pay attention to is the Jammu Massacre. This happens in November 1948, on 6th November. When we keep thinking about the India of today, it's almost like in many people's imagination, there is a before BJP and after BJP. And it's almost as if things are going bad after BJP. But if you look from the Kashmiri vantage, the way Kashmir was annexed and the way Kashmir was melded into India's geo-body, there is the RSS element added to that. The Hindu monarch that I talked about, he was connected deeply to RSS, and his wife too. And they create this massacre in Jammu took place. Jammu was, I think, more than 70% Muslim in 1947. But after the massacre that happened, it wasn't the India's British India and princely states is the partition violence. It was a different violence that happened inside Kashmir, where there was a Hindu, Muslim, Sikh riots taking place. But in the city of Jammu, which is the other province of Kashmir as of today, with the assistance of RSS, the king actually was distributing arms to people so that these massacres could take place, and the Muslims were pushed. Many were killed. They were taken in buses, promised to be taken to Sialkot, but then dropped in midst and killed, executed. It also happened to Hindus. It also happened to Sikhs. But thinking about Jammu, majority of the Jammu, it kind of like got empty of Muslims. And I think the population of Muslims from 68, I think 68 is the statistics, it came down to less than 40%. Because the ruler was also kind of like thinking about the impending plebiscite if it happened. And he was thinking about the religious aspect of who is going where, how many Muslims could go to Pakistan and how many Muslims could go to India. But I also have to mention here that he, for the longest possible time, the ruler also wanted to stay independent. He was thinking of Kashmir as Switzerland. He was thinking of it as a buffer state between the two states. And he had deep linkages with what is now Pakistan. Even his runway was somewhere in Karachi. So then so just to kind of like give you a quick overview, in 1947 and till 1949, you have kind of Kashmir being run through an emergency administration by the guy who's in the photograph on the right side. That's Sheikh Abdullah. He's kind of considered to be one of the tallest leaders in Kashmir. Was is very important in the past. And this is Pandit Nehru. He is the first Prime Minister of India, and he's also a Kashmiri Pandit. And now Kashmiri Pandits are quote unquote Kashmiri Hindus. You have about like 2 to 4% population of Kashmiri Hindus inside Kashmir who were known as Pandits, and Pandit was a name given to them by the Mughal rulers. They used to be very erudite. They used to be kind of the elite, the political and the intellectual elites inside Kashmir. So he was from them, but he was not born in Kashmir. He was born somewhere in India, in Ahmedabad, I think. And they were friends with each other. And India's Kashmir policy was hugely influenced by these two people. And Pandit Nehru, he was very interested in aligning and integrating Kashmir with India, of course. And Sheikh Abdullah, even though he was leading the independence movement of Kashmir, he was leading what was known as the Quit Kashmir movement. He was asking the Maharaja, the ruler, to quit Kashmir. And in those days, before 1947, he had become one of the most revolutionary leaders for Kashmiris. And he had been able to get a lot of gains and a lot of sort of mitigation of the discrimination against Muslims. But then at that time, he kind of like was swayed by the Indian policy because they had been working on him and his party for the longest possible time. So what you see happening in 1949 is the signing of the autonomy agreement for the Jammu and Kashmir part. The Azad Kashmir goes under Pakistan's administration and they have their own autonomous unit. They have their own prime minister and president. What their political equation is, that's completely different. But what you see happening on this side is the imposition of farcical electoral democracy, which for the next 72 years would delude the rest of the world, thinking that Kashmir is being administered in a democratic manner. So what ends up happening is that in the 1950s, with the help of the Sheikh Abdullah and his party, the first elections are held inside Kashmir. Now, the first elections inside Kashmir are not something that that's a legal thing. You do not hold elections in an occupied territory. You do not hold elections in a disputed territory. So for all practical purposes, this entire region is disputed. It's also occupied by the military. So what ends up happening is that United Nations actually takes notice and says that you cannot hold these elections because the matter is sub judice. So on the other side, India, it assures Pakistan as well as United Nations, saying that this election is only for governance. The plebiscite is still at hand. So I think the word that United Nations used was that the elections are out of order because the case is sub judice. But what ends up happening is that there is this politics of democracy that begins to be played as if electoral democracy is democracy in its entirety. So also at that moment, what also happens is like 1951, the first election takes place. 1949, the autonomy agreement, I think that's what they're signing in the photograph, takes place. But that autonomy agreement that a lot of people think that India gave autonomy to Kashmir was also very sinister in a manner. It was a Trojan horse. Because the moment that autonomy agreement was signed, India sent a Trojan horse inside Kashmir through that autonomy agreement, and slowly and steadily from 1949 onwards began to erode Kashmir's independent stature and autonomy itself, and also made the electoral democracy, or let's say the process of voting, bigger and bigger and bigger for people so that people could not think beyond it. And then also essentially criminalized Kashmir's independence movement. You know, this person, he's signing this in 1949, and he's made the prime minister at that point in time. He's an emergency administrator, but down the line, in the next 1 year or 2 years, he's also thinking of himself as the prime minister. But in 1953, he's thrown in jail. And for the next 22 years, he's technically in political wilderness, in exile, and he's in jails. And that's the history of India with anyone who has been its collaborator or who has tried to administer through them, because they crush the political dissent, if any. And he realized within the first 3 years that he had made a big political mistake. He had really, because he saw what RSS was doing and the kind of resistance he was getting from Jammu sector. But by then it was too late, and he was thrown in jail. And he and his party, they started the plebiscite movement. You know, too late. By then he was in jail, and he was also exiled. So what India was able to do also was undermine these UN resolutions that had been put in place. There were, I think, about 10 to 11 resolutions that were passed till late 1960s. So what you actually have in Kashmir from 1949 onwards, let's put the date around 1949 when the autonomy agreement was signed, that it's client politics. This politician was known as the tallest leader till, let's say, late 1970s, because people were still thinking that he would be able to negotiate something with India and not have them capitulate completely. But now he's seen as, I don't think there is any person in Kashmir at the moment who refers to him without using the word traitor. And his grave is under 24/7 security because it can be vandalized, and it has been vandalized in the past. So what you see in Kashmir is client politics masquerading as masquerading a military occupation, basically. You see these quote unquote chief ministers or whoever is administering Kashmir, but they're basically fronting a military occupation, because as we speak today, and as let's say before 2019, you had 2 army commanders helping administer the state from 1989 onwards, especially after the armed resistance broke out. So then the other date that we want to pay attention is August 5, 2019. As I said, the autonomy, whether you call it Article 370, you call it Kashmir's autonomy, or you call it special status, what we see happening in 2019 is its complete revocation and completely removing it. All the special articles that were signed with Kashmiris in 1949. And I use the word Kashmiris just to kind of make it easy, but it wasn't consensus even at that time when the autonomy agreement was signed. It was mostly Sheikh Abdullah and his ilk basically inside Kashmir, and the rest of the people, they possibly, which has happened in every decade, they have looked for some kind of resolution that should be coming. And they have registered their protest, but no one really has paid attention to that. So what you saw August 2019 was militarily, India revoked the quasi-autonomy that was prevalent. With that, the special articles 370 and 35AA was completely removed. And that was the time when Kashmiris were put under this longest siege. India liked to call it lockdown, but lockdown is a very, very it just throws you off. It doesn't tell you what it was. It was a military siege at that time. You have more than 700 troops inside this region. It's one of the highest militarized zone, but they brought in 50,000 or maybe 60,000 more troops. And then there was a complete clampdown on the region. There was no cable TV, there was no internet, there were no phones, and the region was locked from August till I think early October, with a little bit trickling out. International press was not allowed in. So this was done unilaterally. No Kashmiris were taken into cognizance. No Kashmiri voice was taken into cognizance. The other thing they had done in 2018 was they had dismissed the local administration just on just the basis of almost nothing. So this is after the BJP comes to power. But all the things I said till 2014 and 2015 was basically what we know as the secular administrations or secular governments inside Kashmir, inside India. But what you also want to keep your eye on from Kashmiri vantage, there's never been any different treatment that Kashmiris have had at the hands of India. So whether secular or whether religious fanatics, whoever is ruling India, their policy remains pretty much the same. Only the degrees vary, and the discreteness with which they do these processes, they vary. So that's 2019. And I think right now, as we're speaking, this is the kind of Kashmir we're speaking to, where there is no local administration, not even the camouflage of local administration, not even the camouflage of electoral democracy. They're trying to mess with that in some ways. They're trying to divvy up the region in such a way that the next administrator might be from a Hindu majority state. So it's a different kind of politics. But as we are speaking right now, Kashmir was demoted to 2 union territories. That's kind of a category where it's directly administered by Delhi. So you have a person who is nominated by the BJP, and he is right now Lieutenant Colonel Manoj Sinha. I think that's what his name is. I kind of think of them as viceroys, because that's how they seem to Kashmiris. They have carte blanche over everything. And right now, as we speak, everything inside Kashmir is being changed. I can't even keep up with the laws that are changed every day, the statutes that are changed every day, and there is no consensus from Kashmiris. And that's where we kind of like start thinking about settler colonialism. Not that it was any different before, but it's more brazen now, and that's the major worry. So quickly looking at the state of occupation, which kind of makes it an occupation, and how it's also changed face. In 1991, what had happened was that India had declared Kashmir as a disturbed area. So it had come under this act. And then another act was imposed, which was called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And this kind of coincided in repressing the armed movement that had started. More than 700,000 troops were already present. And even though India likes to differ in its statistics, but major human rights organizations all across the world do agree that there are more than 100,000 Kashmiris, both combatants and non-combatants, who've been killed in the violence so far. And there are more than 30,000 people who are maimed, orphaned, and also widowed. What India also does is, since 2014 and increasingly since 2008, it has been using these pellet shotguns. So when we say pellet guns, they kind of look like as if they're used for small beasts or something. But this method, which is known as a non-lethal method for Kashmiris to quell the protests that they used to do and now are completely repressed, what these pellet shotguns were able to do was create mass blinding. And Kashmir is probably one of the first cases of mass blinding in the world. After 2014, I think even in 2016 and 2018, these pellet shotguns were used rampantly on crowds. And there are more than 10,000 custodial disappearances. The custodial disappearances means enforced disappearances, where both combatants and non-combatants are kidnapped basically and thrown into jails and possibly killed. No one knows what happens to those people, even though the government of India calls them missing. And even the local administration, of course, who were the client politicians, they would call these people missing, and then they would say that they probably had run away to become militants or they had run away from their families. And they would also give different statistics, like from 60 to 3,000 to 1,000, and always saying that these people are missing. But again, major human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and of course the United Nations as well, in the last 2 reports that it has done on Kashmir, there are more than 10,000 custodial and enforced disappearances that have occurred. Even though the statistics for rapes is not really consolidated, but there is evidence that there are more than 10,000, and many of them go unreported. Medicine Sans Frontier did one study in which it had provided evidence for the fact that 1 in 7 Kashmiris have either been tortured or witnessed torture. And then there are rampant uses of laws that are completely undemocratic laws, Public Safety Act, and right now majorly dealing with the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. And we'll talk more about that in a little while. So I do want to, I'm sorry, I should have given a trigger alert. I am talking about rape here. So it has been designated as a weapon of war that it has been deployed as in Kashmir in 1994 by Human Rights Watch. There is a report by that name, and since 1994 it has only gotten worse. Again, reports are not done, but there are several places where mass rapes took place, and those people have not received any kind of legal amelioration of their the problems that have occurred due to the rape and in the aftermath of rape. And instead, what has happened is that India has completely denied any culpability of its troops inside Kashmir. And we have a couple of examples where books have been written, research has been done, there are survivor testimonies, but again, there is no recourse to law. This is the slide that I was looking for earlier. I don't know why it jumped to this place, but I do want to talk about this a little bit. So after 2019, I want to kind of like take a moment here and tell the audience what the special status or autonomy did for Kashmir and why it was important and why it was not important. So the reason it was important is because one of the statutes, one of the articles was territorial sovereignty, which meant that Kashmiris had a right to property, Kashmiris had right to franchise, they had a special right which protected their indigenous rights, just like any other country. And because it was a country in 1947 to 1949, when India was negotiating this autonomy agreement with them. So on one hand, you have, it did give Kashmiris a territorial autonomy, which meant that no Indians could buy land inside Kashmir, or no foreigners, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that India wasn't doing business inside Kashmir or was not leasing properties for 99 years plus more, and other people from the rest of the world were not doing business, and they were not being barred in that sense, but it was just a regular territorial sovereignty clause that any country has. So you have that on one hand, but on the other hand, Article 370 was also the Trojan horse that allowed Indian laws inside Kashmir, because then it became a conduit for bringing Indian laws and criminalizing Kashmiri movement. And also because it also brought in the fundamental rights chapter inside Kashmir, which is very unique in the Indian Fundamental Rights Charter. It can jail and imprison any person who is seen as a threat to Indian sovereignty. That kind of started the process of criminalization of Kashmiris. So the autonomy was, on one side, it was giving this territorial protection to Kashmiris. On the other side, it was also bringing in these laws. And by the time it was taken, only the territorial sovereignty piece was what Kashmiris wanted to remain in effect. The other was already gone. So what we saw happening in 2019 was the fetishization of Kashmir that had happened in the Indian imagination in the last 72 years that really came to surface. It had already been prevalent, but now you saw it in a most brazen manner. So you see a couple of pictures on your right side. So the bottom one is this famous movie from the 60s It's based on, the name is Kashmir Ki Kali, meaning a blossom or whatever you want to call a bud from Kashmir. So it's a story, it's a love story where the woman is Kashmiri and the guy is from India, and they fall in love and all of that. So you kind of see that fetishization of Kashmiri women. There is also this deeply racist trope of Kashmiri women being beautiful. You know, I don't know how else to put it, but it sounds very, it's very racially charged, that they are fair, they're beautiful, their cheeks are red, and all of that. So we had already seen that in regular mainstream Indian media happening, but in 2019 something really focused and pivotal happened, which kind of like told the story of the fetishization. One was that it became easy for Indians, and you saw that on Twitter, you saw that in social media, that they were saying, we will go to Kashmir now and buy land. You saw the conqueror's mentality in 2019. It really came to fore. Then there was also the blast of patriotism pop that happened. There were many songs and videos that were released that talked about Kashmiri women and how we should kidnap them. And there was a politician who actually said that in his speech, that you should go and marry Kashmiri girls now. And many people started thinking about land and buying land in Kashmir. And it was really, it digresses from the fact that all of these things were done before 2019. It wasn't as if no land was being bought. It wasn't as if business was not done. It wasn't as if there were not interreligious or intercaste marriages. But the way it was kind of shown as if there was a before 2019 and after 2019, of course, that serves the powers that are prevalent in India right now very much. But at the same time, for Kashmiris, it was not any different, except now the settler colonialism was very brazen. And it really played out on bodies of women. But the other side of it also was that there is a lot of demonization of Kashmiri men that continuously happens and has happened. They are what you see on top of this picture, that is the poster for the film. On top, you see the picture of Afzal Guru. And again, as I say, February is a tough month for Kashmiris. He was hanged in 2013, and he's the guy who was, the case was really only circumstantial evidence. And the Supreme Court judgment noted that he's being hanged to satisfy the collective conscience because he was implicated, quote unquote. He wasn't implicated, but he was part of this group, which also laid bare how much the counterinsurgency inside Kashmir, India's counterinsurgency, ensnares Kashmiris and never lets them go. And he was implicated in this case for or the attack on parliament in 2001. He was implicated in that case. And in the 10 years preceding his hanging, what you really saw was how Kashmiri men are demonized. His case, I've written about that, how his dress was demonized and how he was shown as this Muslim body who's only capable of producing terrorism. When he was caught, he was wearing regular trousers and a shirt, and he didn't even have a beard. And by the time he was in jail, and he wasn't receiving any fair trial, and he was also held in the media trial, basically, where he was pronounced guilty from the start. He also probably, in being in jail, he probably, and knowing that hanging is going to be in his future, and his son is named Ghalib. And Ghalib is one of the most preeminent Urdu poets in the subcontinent. I just want to kind of like bring that to light, you know, these little things, that he wasn't extra religious, or he was also this poetic guy, but he was presented as if he was the epitome of this, the stereotypical Islamic, quote unquote, Islamic terrorist. And this is his picture. He probably was going to one of his hearings in the court where he, you know, by the time he's in jail for 10 long years, and he's also in solitary confinement. And when he was hanged, his jailer actually wrote a book on him and talked about how he was in his daily life, which wasn't really given much media inside India. And they took a picture of him, and this picture kind of like presents him as the Muslim man, so to speak, with the kafaya on his head and wearing the flowing garments that Muslims do. And he's also has a full beard. And this is the picture that permeated Indian imagination for the next 10 years. So I'm thinking that people who were not even convinced of maybe his guilt they would have been by the end of 10 years ready to hang him. And that's what happened, because there's demonization of Kashmiris, Kashmiri movement. And then there's also fetishization of Kashmiri land and Kashmiri women. So that's something that also tells you of the colonial imagination that India has. So I already talked about this, and I think we're also coming to the end, that from 1947 itself, there was the slow erasure of Kashmiri autonomy. Article 37, 35A, they're completely gone now. Although India could not do this without the consensus from Kashmiris and the Kashmiris who were involved at that time, the committee that was involved in formulating this autonomy agreement, but they bypassed it. So they technically de-operationalized it. So it's still in their constitution, but it's only, it's kind of, it's made, it's eviscerated basically. So those laws, especially 35A, it helps maintain Kashmir's identity and its territorial sovereignty. But again, I repeat that most of the laws had gone, and it was just a quasi-autonomy that Kashmiris had. And many Kashmiris, they did not want, they were okay with the fact that autonomy should go, because they thought that this was the only constitutional relationship with India. So once this is gone, then most of the relationship with India will also be gone, and it will be a constitutional nightmare for India because it can be challenged. So the case is still in India's Supreme Court, and I don't know what will come of it, but the fact is that Kashmir is under military occupation at this moment. So all of those laws and all of those electoral democratic mechanisms mean very less, to Kashmiris especially. So the way we can see India's control inside Kashmir is politics of democracy. So you're not really dealing with democracy. If anyone is going to convince, trying to convince you of India's stance, that democracy inside Kashmir is just politics. It's just votes. It's weaponizing electoral politics to engineer Kashmiri's consent. That's what it boils down to basically. And as of now, there is criminalization of plebiscite and a freedom movement as well, which Kashmiris refer to Tehreek.
Zia, are you winding down now?
Yes, I'm just presenting these two last. I'll just, so the impediments to understanding Kashmir is one, it's emptied of its history. That's why we don't really, most international community in the last 40 years, so to speak, because till 1960s, early 70s, this was really well known what was happening within Kashmir. You have many newspapers that were published in United Kingdom in the 60s that talk about this. There are these documentaries that talk about how India annihilated this place. So it's emptied of history. That's why it's easy to think that some kind of terrorism is going on inside this place. And Indian propaganda, which we probably don't know as propaganda, has been going on for 72 years. And the geopolitical politics also, the Cold War first, and now, quote unquote, the war on terror, and of course, Islamophobia. These are really huge impediments to understanding Kashmir. So as we speak, I don't want to kind of like talk about these four people. Criminalization of expression. There is a media gag in Kashmir right now. Journalists cannot report freely. And if anyone does, so this person is Asif Sultan, and he has been in jail since 2016. This is Khurram Parvez. He was in November 2021, he was he was booked under this lawless law, the UAPA, and he's in jail since. This is Fahad Shah. He was very recently, he's a journalist, and he also writes for Foreign Affairs. And this is the statement from Foreign Affairs. And Khurram Parvez, Mary Lawlord, the UN Special Rapporteur, UN has issued a statement for him. So these are regular, legitimate voices. And then you have this very young journalist. He is still a student named Sajjad Gul, and this is his mother showing his photograph. He is also under arrest at this moment. So that's kind of the state of repression, that not just people are repressed, or let's say the combatants who are daily killed, but people whose job is to talk to the rest of the world and whose job is to report, they are not being allowed to talk about Kashmir. So criminalization of expression is at its height at the moment, and Kashmiri occupation, which was de facto is a de jure occupation in this moment. And I think that's what we have to contend with as an international community, looking for points where we can give solidarity to the people. So that's where I will end. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zia, for that wonderful presentation. You've traced back the political history of Kashmir from way back when to the present day. You've talked about the sufferings of the Kashmiri people. One wonders for how long this thing will continue. Anyway, I've got to go now to the messages or questions in chat. I have one from Subhajit Pal. Professor Zia, would you like to talk about the trope of tourism and religion and how this trope has been used to steal land in Kashmir? Also, how this reeks of Islamophobia and repression. I think it also continues and how that contributes to the colonial agenda.
See, there's a couple of ways we can answer this question. At this moment, I really think that the world needs to see Kashmir from a vantage. I mean, Kashmir has always been equalized, especially inside Kashmir, has been equalized with Palestine. But I also kind of think about, if you think about the First Nations here in the US, where I'm sitting right now, I think settler colonialism is very important for us to use as a vantage of what is happening inside Kashmir. And when I say Palestine or I say First Nations here, I'm not talking about that they're same. There are similarities. We are seeing the Indian influx inside Kashmir through a variety of ways. So one is that there is a complete military control over the region. That's always been true. But what India was trying to do was they used the word managing for Kashmir. That's what really the official parlance of many ministers and many people who held this portfolio, they would say that managing Kashmir, handling Kashmir. So there were different ways of handling Kashmir. And I think by the time 1989 arrives, they cannot handle Kashmir the way they had been handling, because Kashmiris by then were really very aware of the political situation and they wanted a redressal. And not many of them wanted to be with India forever. Some wanted to be independent, majority of them, and many are for Pakistan. And there is one resistance movement, armed movement that's continuing to go on inside Kashmir, and most of them want to accede to Pakistan. So there are different things that were deployed as weapons to take hold of Kashmiri territory, to take hold of the emotional, intellectual terrain, because occupation is not only land, occupation is also cultural, occupation is also religious. So all of those things kind of have been put into motion. So tourism is huge in that. And then there is also religious tourism. So there used to be, so there's this trope of Kashmir being a syncretic region where there was this syncretic tradition between the Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims and Kashmiri Sikhs and other denominations. While I do think that there is some level of peacefulness that existed, but I also think that was also a very skewed power dynamics, and where Kashmiri Muslims had nothing else to do but to comply with the political elites who aligned and who were mostly drawn from the 2 to 4% Hindu Pandits. So I think that's something that has not really been critically looked at, but I do want to draw attention to the tradition of the Hindu pilgrimage sites. So there were several sites inside Kashmir which have been popular in the Hindu Pandit community, and one of them was Amarnath. It's a shrine that's dedicated to Lord Shiv and his consort. And now the interesting thing is that maybe, I think 200 years back, it was a Muslim shepherd who discovered that site. And the Muslim shepherd was part of the management, and his family down the line were part of the management who were taking care of this shrine. So the Hindu Pandits were going to the shrine, which is in the Himalayas. It's a stalactite, and they visit there. It was a short 15-day pilgrimage. And then in the late 80s, late 70s, early 80s, the Indian pilgrims started trooping in. by now, the pilgrimage is almost 3 months. I think it's extended now. And it's a big influx of pilgrims inside Kashmir. So you have this really delicate ecosystem, and the stalactite doesn't even last the entire pilgrimage. So they actually have to use air conditioners in the Himalayas to make sure that it doesn't melt. But the level of so the pilgrim influx, on one side, it can be seen as, just a religious expression. But on the other side, the way BJP, especially after 2014, is kind of like thinking about these tourism sites and the pilgrimage sites, and then pushing a lot of pilgrims from India into these really fragile ecosystems. That also tells you how much this region is under danger. Not just the danger of politics and occupation in its military ways, but also the crisis of ecological measures. This is a very, very delicate ecosystem that is prevalent in there. Now, what you see is even the stalactite melts earlier. And you also see a lot of violence around. If there is no physical and direct violence, there is a lot of repression around the pilgrimage that happens because, the region is cut off from the local population for the longest possible time. Now, because the autonomy has also been kind of taken away, it's the outside administrators who come in and take care of all of that. And Kashmiri presence, especially Kashmiri Muslim presence, which used to be the part of their own cultural fabric, is completely gone. So on one hand, while India likes to say that, it's Kashmiri Muslim fundamentalism, but on the other side, the polarization that they're creating through this kind of religious tourism, which is manufactured, engineered, on the basis of something very genuine, like there was a pilgrimage. I'm not denying that. But that was a very organic pilgrimage that was completely different. But some analysts now, they're referring to this pilgrimage that is happening. They call it pilgrimage terrorism. That is also a part of the state agenda to terrorize people into submission. And that is happening. So the trope of tourism, of course, that is, while we were very recently, COVID was at its height, the third wave, you still saw tourists from India going into Kashmir. And I don't think the local economy there is as benefited by these tourists, because what ends up happening is that the contracts, the kind of, things that tourists need, I think they're kind of like being brought from outside now rather than the local people, except for some of the the shikara rides or the pony walas or maybe some of the hotels. Most of the hotels have been, they are in some kind of franchise with bigger hotels in India. So I don't really see, I see the tourism in itself like the fetishization of Kashmir, where a lot of people, pardon my indiscreetness, but Kashmir is many times seen as the honeymoon destination. So a lot of people see it as, they call it like the bedroom of Kashmir, of this region, and that's how it's used. But the local economy could be developed in much more tangible ways, like the horticulture, the agriculture, which is all suffering. Why is it that the service industry, which will keep Kashmiris in a very servile position, always dependent on someone's happiness and someone's munificence, which is the tourist? Why is it that India thinks that there is potential only in that? I don't think Kashmir at this moment is ready for the kind of tourism, whether that be religious or whether that be the mainstream kind of tourism. I don't think Kashmir's mountains or even Kashmir's cities are ready for that. Well, while Kashmir's indigenous economy around handicrafts, around horticulture, agriculture, sericulture, apiculture, that's completely being annihilated. Very recently, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I really like the idea of cultural engagement and cultural interactions. That's how societies and cultures and peoples foster. But what India is doing inside Kashmir, it recently started saying that we are going to train people somewhere in India, I think Varanasi, in Pashmina trade or Pashmina spinning. Now, for a people who were living in normal circumstances, it would not be a problem. But I think people who are facing settler colonialism, they see this as an attack on their indigenous arts. They see their bread and butter being taken away to some other place. And to think that Pashmina is not even indigenously grown in that place. I mean, it's not grown, it's part of an animal. And that animal is lives in Himalayas, and it lives in Ladakh. And Ladakh was torn completely asunder from Kashmir, which is when the two union territories formed in 2019. So what you see is dispossessing of people immediately right after 2019, which was stepped up. So tourism and these sites that are being portrayed as if like the end all and be all destinations, including the ski sites, I see them as part of this larger agenda of settler colonialism. They are not a regular, normal tourism processes. And that's when you look at it from the vantage of settler colonialism. But if you were to buy India's narrative of development, rooting out terrorism, then it becomes a different thing for the rest of the world. But I think this vantage needs to be seen.
Thank you, Dr. Zia. We're approaching 3:15, but before I ask you that last question, we have with us Karen Rodman. You probably know her. She's a great admirer of yours. She's from Justice Peace Advocates, has been doing solidarity work in Kashmir. She's also visited Azad Kashmir with Zafar Bangash. She's on the board for Canadian for Peace and Justice in Kashmir. So welcome, welcome, Karen. She's also posted a couple of links on our chat. So please pay attention to that. And if you are disposed to sending those petitions, by all means, I certainly would encourage you to do it. I'm not sure if Karen wants to do a very quick, short comment before I go to the last question. Karen?
Just assalamu alaikum and shukriya. It's really good to be with you. And yeah, people may want to sign the petition or send the letter. I just thought I'd put those in the chat. So thank you so much. Robert Masood, who had spoken with you at one of your earlier sessions, had mentioned that you were going to have Ather on, and just delighted to be able to listen in. Thank you.
Okay, last question, Dr. Zia, if you would have a short response to that. Is there any merit for Kashmiris to align their struggle with the Muslims' rights in India?
Well, I think it's very important to see it from, see, that's the thing. I think in this moment, we can very well see this as also a Muslim issue, but then we also have to make it into a very defined category that Kashmiri Muslims inside Kashmir, they're fighting against the Indian constitution. And the Indian Muslims are fighting maybe the Indian state, if we can consider it as some kind of a collective fighting at this moment. They're fighting within the Indian constitution. So they become two different things. The Muslimness might overlap, the Islam might overlap, but I think politically they're two very different fights. There are cultural elements that are similar, but I don't think we can collate them in that sense. But they can be seen under the rubric of this very local imperial brown Islamophobia.
And before we close, I would like to thank Dr. Zia for her excellent presentation, so full of information and history and the current situation in Kashmir. I'd like to thank Takir Antullah for his co-hosting and all the assistance that he's given us. And above all, I'd like to thank our audience for attending.